From Hampton Beach, New Hampshire, and the historic Ashworth by the Sea Hotel, it's Politics in Progress. With your host, Charlie Sherman.
Good Sunday morning and welcome to another edition of Politics in Progress. I'm Charlie Sherman. This is the program where we talk politics in the Granite State and in the national level as well. If it affects you, we talk about it. Introducing our panel this morning on Politics in Progress, we start from the left. Steve Marchand with us, the former mayor of the city of Portsmouth and also the managing director of the Marchand Group. Also on the right, Bob Clegg, former state senator and Hudson's #1 citizen. And our man in the middle today, Dean Spiliotis of nhpoliticalcapital.com and Southern New Hampshire University. Good morning, gentlemen, and welcome.
Good morning.
All right, let's start out with some interesting poll numbers that were released earlier this week from the WMUR UNH Survey Center, and we'll run down some of these numbers. Starting, of course, with the U.S. Senate race, because those were the most interesting numbers. The big number that jumped out at everybody was the Kelly Ayotte hypothetical race against Paul Hodes, with Kelly Ayotte beating Paul Hodes 40% to 33% with a 4.5% margin of error if the election were held today. And Steve, let me start with you. We've been hearing a lot of bantering back and forth between these two potential candidates. And this is, I think, what most people expected this far out. Would you agree?
I would, and indeed, other polls from other organizations show at this point in the race kind of a mid to high single-digit lead for Ayotte relative to Hodes. Of course, very few people are paying attention at this point. If you look at the UNH poll, I think that Paul's biggest challenge at the moment is that Democrats, there's a greater uncertainty about Paul's candidacy in a head-to-head than there is about Kelly's. There are more Democrats that are undecided in that head-to-head, and there are more Democrats that are willing to go Republican than the opposite in the Republican. If Paul does a good job of getting those Democrats to come back home at the same percentages that Kelly in this head-to-head does, you would see a race that would be effectively tied. And I think it's going to be a pretty close race all the way through, and they both have unique strengths and weaknesses that'll make it difficult for one of them to pull far ahead from now to Election Day, I think.
Dean, you studied the numbers. Did anything jump out at you besides the overall top number?
Absolutely. I think if you take a look at the internals in the polls, Kelly Ayotte does well with independents. She does well with men. And the other concern is the one that Steve raised, that if you look at Paul Hodes' Democratic support right now, I think it was around 63%, which is a little bit low for an incumbent Democrat. So they have to be a little bit concerned about that. I do think that we are looking at a race that I think very quickly could become largely a dead heat. And Kelly Ayotte is still new. I think there's a lot of excitement about her among some voters in the state. But once she goes through a primary and we get into that general election, if she's the nominee, we could end up with a much tighter race. But it looks like about a sort of a mid-single-digit lead at this point.
Well, these are impressive numbers for Kelly Ayotte, considering we don't know her position on too many things at this point. So it's almost like a popularity contest at this point.
But I think she's been in the forefront on a lot of the issues right along. And I think what you're seeing is, you're seeing that Paul Hodes is suffering what people see as a problem with Washington. They're not happy with the health care reform. They're not happy with a number of things. And I think because he is sitting there, just like any incumbent, he's going to take the hit just a little bit more than anybody else. Kelly, on the other hand, was in the forefront with the Michael Briggs case and a few other things, and she's not been afraid to take a stand. And I think that's what people are looking for. Someone that they can send to Washington that they're not worried about so much where they stand as whether or not once they take a stand, will they stand there and take whatever it takes to get it done.
The other potential Republican candidates that were in the poll were Sean Mahoney and Ovid LaMontagne. Their numbers pretty much identical, 38% to 27%, with Hodes 33% undecided. Again, we're so far out right now, but should that be encouraging or discouraging to Ovid or to Sean?
Well, I think the biggest issue for them, even for someone like Ovid, who's already run for statewide office before, is they're just not going to have the same name recognition that either Hodes would have, or especially Kelly Ayotte on the Republican side. So I think a lot of that is just a function of them, if they're going to get fully into the race, doing that and then building up their name recognition. Those numbers might rise a little bit, but I also think there's a perception among independents, whether it's deserved or not, that Ayotte is more moderate. We'll see how that plays out in the primary, and that may be helping her a little bit too, and hurting them a little bit.
Bob, should they be concerned?
Well, I think they should be concerned. I think that what you're seeing is you're seeing the Republican Party take a good look at what's out there. I think they like the idea that Kelly may be a little bit more moderate and on some issues. Ovid obviously is extremely conservative. Ovid also has a little bit of a problem representing CMC with its merger with Dartmouth. That group that would normally be his base has come out and said, we're not supporting you, we don't want any part of it. Sean Mahoney's been a committee man for a long time, and I think part of what's hurting Sean is the fact that some people don't want him to stop being the committeeman. So I think he has that going against him.
Steve, do you think that, when you look at these numbers, that their camps, being Ovid and Sean, say, well, this isn't that bad. We haven't really done much at this point, where Kelly has gotten all of the advanced publicity just because of who she is, the former Attorney General, and Washington saying, well, she's the one that we kind of like.
This early, over a year from the general election, almost a year from the primary, right? We got to get the primaries next September. We're dealing mainly with name ID as well as national sentiment, the brand of a Republican versus the brand of Democrat, because in the polls they typically will say, will you vote for Democrat X or Republican Y? And just that brand says a lot. So what you're looking at now is the fact that both of them, I think you said it was 38-27, they both have about 15% statewide name ID. They're basically representing the generic Republican on a ballot right now. But of course, they're unique people with strengths and weaknesses. It'll change as this thing moves on.
What does this say about Paul Hodes?
It says that Paul is not that well known in the big picture. Remember, he's never represented half the state, the first CD, and he's only a second termer in the second CD, and people think everybody will know you after that. It takes time, so he's got some name ID work to do as well.
Dean, should he be discouraged? The fact that you look at him against a relative unknown like Kelly Ayotte, or even the numbers against Ovid and Sean, should he look at that and say, whoa, I got some work to do?
Well, I think he needs to be careful that because he's essentially likely going to be the nominee, there's no challenge to his seat. People think he has it under control.
Yeah.
They don't really need to get involved. He got in really early, so he may not be registering at the top of people's radars. But I think they knew that Ayotte was going to be competitive, and that potentially one of these other candidates might be as well. I think they expect it's going to be a very expensive, close race, whoever his competitor is in November.
Bob, should he be concerned that, wow, I'm an incumbent congressman?
I don't think so. Being someone who was elected for 14 years in the legislature, when I ran for the first CD, I was majority leader, always in. My name was in the paper constantly. Yeah. And I found as I went through the state, nobody knew who I was. So.
Nobody knows. Nobody knows. Nothing personal, or else don't run for this stuff, because nobody knows who the heck you are, in most cases, for a long time after you've entered public life.
You're lucky if your relatives remember who you are.
And that's in general, by the way. Yeah.
I used to be somebody, remember? All right, when we come back, we have to take a break. We want to talk about some of the numbers for fundraising that have been announced this week as well. Some impressive fundraising numbers at that. We'll talk about those issues and more when we return from the Ashworth in Hampton. By the way, if you happen to be out on a Thursday night, that's when we tape the show. Come on down to the Ashworth by the Sea on beautiful Hampton Beach. You're watching Politics in Progress.
Ashworth by the Sea offers the ultimate beachfront dining experience. With 4 unique oceanfront dining options, there is truly something for everyone's palate, along with a full entertainment schedule that keeps everybody coming back for more.